I did not watch the convention. I don't think that's a surprise. I got a lot of stuff to do. And they are pretty long events. But I did read some of what was said. And the one thing that I think is important to recognize is this idea that America is somehow on the verge of collapse, this vision of violence and chaos everywhere, doesn't really jibe with the experience of most people. I mean, I hope people the next morning walked outside and the birds were chirping and the sun was out, and this afternoon people will be, watching their kids play in sports teams and go to the swimming pool, and folks are going to work and getting ready for the weekend. And in particular, I think it is important just to be absolutely clear here that some of the fears that were expressed throughout the week just don't jibe with the facts. So let's take two specific examples. When it comes to crime, the violent crime rate in America has been lower during my presidency than any time in the last 3-4 decades.
Okay, I needed to interject here because Obama is doing what I mentioned earlier. He is changing what the real concern was. Trump never addressed the long-term decline in crime rates. Trump is talking about the recent developments of lawlessness. And by the way, that lawlessness extends beyond the streets. He's not just talking about, Trump isn't, about lawlessness in the streets of Ferguson and the streets of Baltimore and violence against police officers, ambushing and murdering of police officers. He's not simply talking about that. Trump is about the lawlessness that extends out of the government. Barack Obama has been lawless. His attorney general has been lawless. Hillary Clinton has been lawless. Barack Obama has written executive orders that have superseded actual black letter law. That's not allowed. That's lawless. That's what Trump was referring to. But Obama wants to narrow it. He's trying to narrow the scope of what lawlessness means. He's going into just crime rates. And then once he's in the crime rate realm, he's expanding it and saying, look, over the past, since Reagan, the crime rates are lower. Since Bush, the crime rates are lower. Irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. But this is how he tries to defend the indefensible.
And although it is true that we've seen an uptick in murders and violent crime in some cities this year, the fact of the matter is that the murder rate today, the violence rate today, is far lower than it was when Ronald Reagan was president.
Okay, I'm throwing a flag. I have to interrupt again. I really object to the use of the term uptick. There is not an uptick. An uptick is like just a slight increase. Instead of, it's like, oh, it was going down, the trend was down, oh, it ticked up. What's going on is not an uptick. The Chicago homicide rate is double what it was last year. That's not an uptick. That's an explosion of crime. See how he's really discounting what the problem is? He's really being very dismissive here. It's wrong.
And lower than when I took office. We've just gone through a tragic period where we saw both tragedy in Minnesota and Rouge, and then the insanity and the viciousness of people targeting police officers. And we are all heartbroken by that, and we're all troubled by how we can rebuild trust, support law enforcement, and make sure the communities feel that they are being fairly policed. But the fact is that the rate of intentional killings of police officers is also significantly lower than it was when Ronald Reagan was president.
Sorry for interjecting again, but a couple of things. The first thing relates directly to what Obama just said. Don't you think it's interesting that he has to go back 30 years to Ronald Reagan to compare the crime rates of today? I mean, why 30 years? I mean, it just so much of the man is disingenuous. It's just hard to even take. The other thing is, when President Obama talks about the murder of police officers as he's doing in this video, are you as impressed as I am at the lack of any emotion behind it? Like just go back in your memory and think about how Obama reacted to things like the beheading of an American and the murder of police officers in Dallas and in New York. And remember those? And I mean, he comes out, he makes this perfunctory boilerplate kind of announcement, and then he's off to the golf course. And it's when you contrast his emotional state, his demeanor at the time he makes those kind of statements with his demeanor when there's a gun crime and he wants to push his gun agenda and he sheds tears and he's visibly angry, or when his friend Henry Louis Gates is arrested and he, before knowing any of the facts, calls the police stupid, or Trayvon Martin, when there's a rash of home break-ins in a neighborhood and he before he knows any of the facts, comes out and says, if I had a son, he would look like this kid, not realizing that the kid would also look like a lot of the people that were breaking into the homes in Sanford, Florida. I mean, he seems to have a completely different emotional state under one set of circumstances versus another set of circumstances. One, he seems very emotional and very agitated, and the other one, he almost appears as though he couldn't be bothered, just like here.
Now, those are facts. That's the data. When it comes to immigration, I think Americans expect that our immigration process is orderly and it is legal. And we have put unprecedented resources at our border.
There's that word again, unprecedented. So much of the Obama administration has been unprecedented. Have you noticed that? Everything he does is unprecedented. It's unbelievable how unprecedented this is. Everything's unprecedented under this guy.
Well, it turns out that the rate of illegal migration into the United States today is lower by 2/3 than it was when Ronald Reagan was president. We have far fewer undocumented workers crossing the border today than we did in the 80s or the 90s or when George Bush was president.
You know, there really is only so much of this stuff you can take. Obama is acting as if there isn't a problem. He's acting like he's done things to reduce the flow. He's done nothing to reduce the flow. What he has done is he's instructed the Border Patrol to and the Department of Homeland Security to count as people that they just turn around at the border and tell them to go back. No, as deportations. So they've gamed their own statistics to make you believe that there really isn't such a problem. I mean, just look in your towns, look in your neighborhoods, look where you live. If you don't live in a big city, if you live in a suburban town, or if you live in an ex-urban town, be honest. You know as well as I know that there are floods of illegal aliens all over the place that are living in your communities. Most of them are law-abiding people, and they're decent. I'm not here to trash the illegal aliens, but for Obama to act like there isn't a problem, that there isn't a burden, a tax burden for the schools and everything else being placed on localities that are directly the result of federal policy, whether he inherited it or not, he's the president today. And he's been the president for the last 8 years, and he's acting like he's fixed the problem when he's not fixed the problem at all. And everybody in the country knows it, and that's why Donald Trump is doing so well.
That's a fact.